Welcome, John. Thank you very much, and I too acknowledge we're meeting on Aboriginal land. This is the land of the Gadigal. It always has been, it always will be. I wanted to say many of the same things that Beck and Richard said, but I want to say them slightly differently, and I want to start somewhere completely different. Do you remember when you were a kid, in the Holden or the Ford, Australian-made vehicle, you got in the back, Mum and Dad were up the front, and you were driving off to the dream holiday? Remember feeling like it took forever to get there? Just taking far too long, and you start the chat, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Remember, I'll just paint this picture a bit more. Remember, Dad, we'll call him Malcolm, and it's just because displays the interloper, who we'll call Tony, and he's back there, he's very, very successful businessman, he's restoring confidence to the household holiday trip, and Mum is very likeable, very approachable, everybody likes her, can do no wrong. We'll call her, for example, Mike. Anyway, they're saying, we'll be there soon, kids. But suddenly the older kids in the back realise, hey, wait a minute, we're not headed in the right direction. In fact, we're headed in the wrong direction. And at first we think, well, Mum and Dad are lost, but then we realise actually something else has happened. And Mum and Dad say to us, look, actually, we really would have liked to have gone to that dream holiday destination, but the family accountant told us we couldn't afford it. So we sold off the bookings to some friends of ours from overseas who have a bit more money than us, so we sold off those bookings to them. We're going somewhere not quite as nice. And eventually the younger kids, who are always, I'm the youngest of four, the youngest kids are always the more radical. The youngest kids start investigating and understanding the family accountant was actually also the accountant to the wealthy friends of the family who bought the holiday. Well, that's what's happened to us. And what I'm going to argue today is it's time for us kids to hop over the bench seat in front of the car and take over the steering wheel, turn it around and get us to where we need to get to and get us there very quickly. There is a promise of a renewable energy future. That renewable energy future stabilises electricity bills. It reduces and eliminates carbon emissions. It creates tens of thousands of new jobs. It redistributes wealth in our economy by enabling communities to take control of their own energy, stopping our energy bills disappearing increasingly into the hands of multinational corporations and their profits. That future is possible. The arguments over possibility have disappeared years ago, as Richard said, and the technologies that Richard showed you show that it's absolutely possible. It's affordable. In fact, in many ways, the alternatives are completely in many ways, in a very important way, the alternatives are completely unaffordable. And it's essential morally, it's essential politically, but it's also essential economically. If we want to have jobs for the 21st century, if we want to have an economy that is contributing to the greatest global challenge, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, if we want to generate a dynamic economy that shares wealth, then this transformation is essential. But that's not what's happening. What's happening is, in fact, we're going in the wrong direction. And what I want to do this afternoon is tell you the three key reasons, give you what I think are the three key reasons, which aren't terribly different to those that Rebecca outlined. I want to give you the three key reasons why we're not headed in that direction, and then I want to tell you what I reckon we should do to address each of those three reasons. Hop over the front seat, turn the car around and get there. And the first of those reasons is the infinite capacity of politicians to lie. I've been in this business now for 8 years, and I'm constantly shocked by the bald-faced lies that come from people. And in fact, not only they lie, but they're quite happy to contradict themselves. On the one hand, Malcolm Turnbull talks about silicon disruption, the great exciting future, innovation, the three things we can do as a nation. On the other hand, when he's challenged on the issue of coal, he says coal is a very important part, the largest single part of the global energy mix, and likely to remain that way for a very long time. So that's not my forecast, but the International Energy Agency's forecast and many others. He goes on to say, I don't agree this is Dan Melbourne, I don't agree with the idea of a moratorium on exporting coal. If Australia stopped exporting coal, countries to which we export it would simply buy it from somewhere else. In fact, another statement, he says actually that the emissions would not get better, they get worse, because remarkably our coal is cleaner than everybody else's coal. Xenophobia is alive and well, not just in our society, but also in our minerals industry. Those lies go, for example, the two-facedness of what they're doing, the way in which that confuses, deliberately is set out to confuse the population. There was a fantastic article in today's Sydney Morning Herald, which the headline of which goes directly to my overworked introductory analogy, which was Abbott's red light goes green. And this is terrific. The red light on climate, on acting on our climate, is over, and we've got Malcolm Turnbull there, and we're going green. The going green was that we're applying to become the co-chair of the Green Climate Fund, which Tony Abbott described as Bob Brown's bank on a global scale. It's not a bad thing. I don't mind the Green Climate Fund, but being a chair of the Green Climate Fund and putting as your frontline policy, putting Ms Bishop as the chair, not Bronwyn, the other one, as the chair of that fund, while at the same time you're approving two giant coal mines, one in Queensland, one in New South Wales, and pushing ahead with record coal exports, where Australia will increase its dominance of global coal trade, as well as becoming a significant player in the gas trade, is rank hypocrisy, but it is confusing for the population. The second problem we have is the enormous political power of the fossil fuel industry. I watch it on a day-by-day, minute-by-minute basis in the New South Wales Parliament. People who know better talk about the essential nature of the coal industry to New South Wales. They know better. They know that actually we can have a healthier economy, a healthier society without fossil fuels. But nonetheless, they say that. Why is that? Well, I think there are two key reasons. The first comes simply down to what does a politician do when they leave politics? Well, some of us go out and become community organisers, but a lot of us like the idea of a very soft landing in a very wealthy corporation. John Anderson and Martin Ferguson, a National Party and a Labor Party former senior ministers, both worked for Left Parliament and worked for the fossil fuel industry. Treasurer Mike Baird's former Chief of Staff, Stephen Galilee, is now the Chief Executive Officer of the Minerals Council of New South Wales. To say that there is a well-worn path from politics to the fossil fuel industry is to be dismissive of well-worn paths. It's an escalator ride that gets you there very quickly if you do the right thing. This has to come to an end. But even more is the fear factor. I take you back to 2012, and a thing called, which I think that Beck referred to, the resource super profits tax. A terrific idea, about $8 billion a year, enough to pay for Gonski, for all schools, the federal government's contribution to Gonski for here and for eternity onwards for all public schools, and also to refund TAFE. I'll get to TAFE in a minute. That tax was defeated. It was defeated by the spending of $27 million by it's good leverage when you think about it. The minerals industry spent $27 million on the campaign against it to avoid paying $8 billion a year. You can see why political corruption is such a highly economically efficient activity. They spent $27 million. Part of it was in cash gifts directly to the Labor Party, to the coalition. But most of it was in their own direct spending. $17 million by the Mineral Council, BHP Billiton, $4.2 million, Rio Tinto, always cheap in these things, spent half a $1 million. But that wasn't the real issue. It wasn't the money they spent, it was the money they threatened to spend. And they let it be known that they had $720 million to spend, that they were going to direct mail every individual repeatedly with every marginal seat that Labor held, and they would drive Labor out of business. It was an act of terrorism, genuine terrorism. It was economic terrorism. The real terrorists were arriving in Australia off jumbo jets, carrying suitcases full of cash, I guess they don't have cash checkbooks, whatever they used. They came off those planes and they changed our Prime Minister, not necessarily for the worse, from bad to bad. They changed our Prime Minister, they changed our policy, they changed our policy debate. And every single Labor and Coalition politician since then has lived in fear of what that industry can do if you annoy it. And the third reason, which is the reason that Beck talked about, is the issue of the absolute obsession with markets, with neoliberalism. It has two distinct parts to it. The first part is the idea that there is something unclean about public activities. There is something inherently inefficient about the public sector. Despite the massive success of our TAFE system, our public school system, our public hospital system, despite the fact that public energy in Australia delivered world-cheap electricity, admittedly it destroyed the planet while it did it, but despite the huge successes of public undertakings, we can't keep doing this in the public sector, and it serves you whatever bullshit reason you want to come up with. It'll cost us too much, we're making too much money, we're anti-competitive, we're too competitive. It'll drive up electricity prices, it'll whatever excuse they want to put in there, it doesn't matter. They want to destroy the public sector. It is ideological, and when I say they, I don't mean the Liberals and the Nationals. I mean the male politicians that run Australia, and a couple of females as well, who have drunk the Kool-Aid that came from Margaret Thatcher, drunk the Kool-Aid that came from Ronald Reagan, about changing Australian society. And they don't really care terribly much. What they want to do is they want to change what people think of their lives. It's that kind of neoliberalism. But the second aspect is the blind faith in markets. The idea that somehow or other, a bunch of greedy, selfish, short-sighted individuals fighting their way through the politics of boardrooms, making decisions that really are only focused on surviving into the next round of profit reporting seasons and getting their bonuses, will somehow or other collectively make decisions that are in our best interests, globally, collectively, and for the next 100 years, which is what we have to do with greenhouse gas emissions and climate. It's to say that it's naive is ridiculous. It's beyond naive. It is patently not true, and it's one of those things where there is evidence that it does not work. Yet that idea drove the carbon pricing fiasco. That idea has us fixated on the mechanism of the renewable energy target and the carbon price. Now, I've got to say, I quite like the renewable energy target. I think it's a good thing. I quite like carbon prices. I probably disagree with you. I think carbon prices, renewable energy targets, and all these things, they're useful transition mechanisms, but they are not the main game in town. We have spent the last 10 years of climate policy fixated on the sideshow, the main arena, the big arena, the arena which we took into Parliament a year ago with our 100% renewables New South Wales bill, the arena that Beck identified, the arena that anybody who is not totally captured by the fossil fuel industry or by the idiocy of neoliberalism would instantly recognise is that we have to have some thou shalt nots, and that we have to have some thou shalts. We have gone beyond that moment in history where we can solve this by fiddling at the edges. This is wholesale change. Our electricity industry in New South Wales is probably, the capital assets are probably worth something in the order of $35 to $50 billion. The idea that we would change that by a $30 or $40 charge on carbon, the idea that we would change that by a target for renewable energy backed up by some trading requirements, in the time left to us to do this before we have lost the opportunity to control the Earth's climate to less than 2 degrees temperature rise, is absurd, it is not true, it won't work. There's only one way to do it now, and that is to shut down coal-fired power stations. Shut down coal-fired power stations, we've got to mandate investment in renewable energy, and we have to unleash that incredibly potent force that got my dad a job when he got back from the Second World War, and got my diapers, my nappies washed and clean, that force which is public sector energy, that force which keeps the lights on, that force which is the capacity of us together collectively to borrow money, to invest it in new technologies, maybe take a bit of a risk here and there in a technology that the private sector isn't prepared to do so, but to make sure that we make that transition, make sure we generate those jobs here in Australia. I want to go through, how do I go?
Keep going.
I want to go through just, I just want to go through 4 key things that have happened that are really awful. The first one is Labor sort of, and then the coalition in New South Wales finished the job off. They sold the power stations. Almost all of it's done now. Let's be clear, that's 60 million tonnes of carbon dioxide going to the atmosphere every year, passed over as a property right to the private sector, who are not going to shut them down and move out of the business because we don't like it. We passed over control. Because of neoliberalism, we passed over control. We have to renationalise the power stations. Labor, I say Labor, I mean those economic, environmental, social criminals who are running the Labor government in New South Wales sold the retailers. The retailers, the public sector retailers, who by the way were very profitable, so they had to be sold. Those retailers, they were too profitable, so they had to be sold. Unlike the ones that weren't too profitable, had to be sold. Badness. Those retailers are critical because this is a complex future. Nobody is saying that the renewable energy future is not complex. I don't have time. I probably do have the knowledge base because I've spent the last 30 years studying it, but most people don't have the knowledge base all the time to navigate their way through the complexities of the energy market. What they need is a friend they can rely on, somebody who they know will put their interests ahead of corporate profit and who will negotiate a deal for them that will protect their bills, reduce their carbon footprint, and enable them to become participants. Not spending minute by minute watching the fluctuations of energy prices. Not worrying about whether they've got the best deal or not. If you actually tried to change your electricity retailer and tried to work out what the best deal is, I gave in. I went for the one remaining public sector retailer, Red Energy, who's the only public. I only chose them. They're no good. They're awful people. They're owned by Snowy Hydro. I don't like them at all. But they're public owned. It was the only decision-making objective I could find. But we need public sector energy service agencies to stand as a friend, as an investment agency, as a benefit sharer with the community. The third stupid thing that was done is being done as we speak is the sale of wires and poles. For a fistful of cash, we will get probably about $8, $9, $10 billion for it. Sounds like a lot, but it's only 1 year of the resource super profits tax. It's not a lot of money. Sorry?
We'll get a motorway though.
We'll get a motorway for it. We get a motorway for it. Thanks, Chris. Sorry?
And the trams.
Yeah, with the trams and motorways, but we will lose control over the very backbone